Hi, guys. I'm Jeremy, and today I thought I'd weigh in on the Giuffre Epstein case since it's been one of the biggest news stories on and off the last 6 years. And it's also been big in the news lately because the DOJ released 3 million pages of documents, pictures, and videos, but the majority of these are heavily or completely redacted for various reasons. And they still have 3 million documents that they haven't released. So, although we don't know the whole story, there's still a lot we can learn from what's been released, what we know of Epstein's life, and the people he was surrounded with. There's also some information from some of the interviews and depositions by him and others. Of course, it doesn't mean that these are true necessarily, but there could be some useful information. There's not a lot of things we know for sure, but he was definitely involved in soliciting and trafficking more than 1,000 young women, many of who were 16 or younger. He was initially arrested for this in 2006 in Florida and should have been put away for decades in prison, but he got a slap in the wrist. He was later arrested again in July of 2019, and just over a month later, he apparently committed suicide in jail, which most people don't believe. So there's been many questions and conspiracies about Giuffre Epstein. How was a college dropout able to amass hundreds of millions of dollars? Was he some kind of genius? Was he a government agent of the CIA or Mossad? Was this all part of some honeypot operation? Why were so many high-profile people either seen with him or reported being good friends with him? Were they sacrificing babies on Epstein Island? So there's many crazy questions that linger. Because this case has so many high-profile people involved, and there was no justice, and he died mysteriously, this has naturally been a huge story. And although it's a big story on its own, people will often embellish, over-speculate, and come up with these conspiracy theories that are probably to get more views or publicity, but also to earn money. And then, of course, many people believe these too, obviously. Some of these crazy things might be true, but I personally have a high bar for accepting any type of crazy conspiracy theory or going too far on speculating over limited evidence. So I'm going to show you why it's probably a much simpler story that's probably been going on since the beginning of time in one way or another. And like most wealthy men in history, he probably would have gotten away with it, and initially did, but it was ultimately the Me Too movement that brought him and many others down. I don't think he was a huge genius or financial wizard. He probably was above average in intelligence. But if you look at the history of his life and what he did, you could see he has been a criminal since his 20s. And he used his ability as a con artist to deceive people and defraud them out of hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases. And he was using this money basically to fuel his sex addiction, which was often with very young women that were in high school, normally around 15, 16 years old, but even younger. I'll go into the important timeline of his life and major people who would get involved with him, like Ghislaine Maxwell, Lex Wexner, and other high-profile people, and also get some of the perspectives from the victims of sexual abuse, and then give my opinions as I go through this. So Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, and lived in Seagate, a quiet gated community out in Coney Island. His grandparents were Jews who came from Eastern Europe, and his parents were working class. His mother was a school aide and homemaker, and his father worked as a groundskeeper and gardener for the New York City Parks Department. He had a younger brother named Mark and grew up in a modest environment. Jeffrey was described as a quiet, nerdy kid who tutored classmates for extra cash at Mark Twain Junior High. He loved music, started piano at age 5, and even spent a summer at a prestigious music camp in Michigan. Academically sharp in math, he skipped 2 grades and graduated Lafayette High School at just 16 years old in 1969. I don't see or have found anything unusual about his early life. He did have a high school sweetheart of Italian descent, but no strange behavior as far as we know. I don't see much about relationships or anything inappropriate about him in college either. I would be curious if anything inappropriate happened to him, but we'll probably never know. After high school, he attended a couple universities, first some advanced math at Cooper Union, then New York University's Corin Institute studying mathematical physiology. But even though he spent 4 or 5 years in college, he never finished a degree and dropped out in 1974. Now, of course, college isn't for everyone, and many people will go off to do better things and don't need a degree, but I'm surprised he spent that much time in college and didn't finish, especially if he would end up with a brief teaching career. Of course, maybe he didn't know he was going to do that, but maybe he was quite young when he entered college and maybe he wasn't mature enough. But it also could be that maybe he was in over his head. So we never know how much someone is shaped by nurture or nature. I'm not sure if it was at this point of his life or later after his teaching career that he realized he came from a pretty humble background. He didn't have a college degree. He might have to look into taking some shortcuts in life, especially if he was going to amass a lot of money. He might have also realized by his early 20s that he was attracted to very young women, which is obviously unusual once you pass that age. But this could also be the reason why he wanted to be a high school teacher. So in 1974, at age 21, Esptein gets hired as a math teacher at the elite Dalton School on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The headmaster at the time, Donald Barr, was known for unconventional hires. Esptein taught calculus despite having no degree. He was described by students as someone who didn't abide by the dress code, gave easy A's, and paid special attention to the female students. He even appeared at a high school party once, at least once. So he's like at least 3 to 7 years older than any of these students, which is pretty creepy. Although people said he paid more attention to young women, he isn't accused of anything during his time teaching. He only lasts 2 years before he's fired for poor performance, but he continues to fail upwards. Parent with connections recommends him to Bear Stearns. Esptein starts at the bottom in 1976 as a junior assistant, but Esptein was quick to learn, sell, and impress, and he rises insanely fast. By 1980, he's a limited partner making $200,000 a year, which is about $800,000 today. And to get the job, he even lied on his resume, claiming he had college degrees, but his bosses ended up giving him a shot anyway because they often hired people who they thought could be motivated or intelligent, even if they didn't have a degree, just like how he got this high school job. It was also in that year that Esptein was in Cosmopolitan's magazine as the Bachelor of the Month. The brief advertisement for himself reads in full. Financial strategist Giuffre Epstein, 27, talks only to people who make over $1 million a year. If you're a cute Texas girl, write this New York dynamo. But in 1981, he was pushed out or forced to resign because of concerns about violating company policies involving clients, and he may have been involved in improper or questionable dealings with clients' money. So during these 5 years, he would definitely learn the ropes of the industry and probably how he can earn more money in illegitimate ways, whether insider trading or embezzling clients' funds, etc. He launches his own consulting firm, Intercontinental Assets Group, where he managed wealth for the ultra-rich. He uses his connections on Wall Street to be introduced to several wealthy clients in Europe and the Middle East. In one case in 1982, Esptein convinced Michael Stroll, a former president of Sega, to invest $450,000, which was roughly 10% of Stroll's net worth at the time, in what he pitched as a crude oil deal through his joint venture. There was no real oil deal. Most or all of the money vanished, and Esptein dodged Stroll's repeated demands for repayment. While stringing Stroll along and dodging calls, Esptein sent him literally a quart of oil as proof that the deal was real or just to mock him. Stroll later sued Epstein and lost. The court said Epstein was not guilty because he was only a representative of the company. Stroll later said in an interview that Epstein was a despicable prick. So this was probably the first time Epstein gained a substantial amount of money ripping people off when he was about 29 years old. In another case, he manages a defense contractor named Douglas Leese, who had connections in the British government and arms industry. But after several years, he accused Epstein of misusing his expense account for personal spending, including Concorde flights and luxury hotel stays, so he fires him. In the early 80s, he also acted as a bounty hunter who assisted clients recover embezzled funds. In one case, he was able to recover funds from several wealthy Spanish families who lost their money during the collapse of the Drydale government securities. Epstein and his associates spent a year trying to find the money, which ended up being hidden in the Cayman Islands. He returned their money, and they rewarded him with millions, which is probably when he became a millionaire or a multi-millionaire. Epstein also helped recover funds from a Saudi Arabian businessman, Adnan Khashoggi, who was a middleman in transferring American weapons from Israel to Iran as part of the Iran-Contra affair. In 1987, Epstein ended up working with Stephen Hoffenberg, who had founded and ran Towers Financial Corporation, which turned out to be one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history before Bernie Madoff. Epstein left before it finally collapsed in 1993, but according to Hoffenberg, Epstein was the architect of the scam, but was never charged. Hoffenberg ended up getting sentenced to 20 years, and we can only imagine how much Epstein made off this and how he even got away. Also in the late 80s, Epstein rebranded his company as J. Epstein and Company, a private wealth manager for billionaires only. This is when Epstein meets Lex Wexner, founder of L Brands and Victoria's Secret, around 1986 through mutual friends in Palm Beach. Wexner says they met by happenstance, but I imagine Epstein was probably seeking him out for a couple reasons. Not just because he was insanely wealthy, but because he owns Victoria's Secret, which might give him access to beautiful women. Although Epstein was only supposed to manage his personal wealth, he later told prospective models that he was a scout for Victoria's Secret when he wasn't. So Wexner had 20 different companies he was running, so he was super busy traveling around the world, and he needed someone to sign many documents at home when he wasn't there. So he ended up giving Epstein power of attorney, which unfortunately wasn't his best idea, but he obviously didn't know what would come of it. Over the years, Wexner ends up selling him one of his planes, his mansion in New York, and other property in Ohio to Epstein. Over a 20-year period that Epstein managed his wealth, he stole anywhere from $47 million, but possibly up to $1 billion. Wexner eventually found out he was being robbed, and he sued Epstein for about $100 million, but I'm sure Epstein got away with hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. From around 1980 to 1991, the most well-documented romantic relationship Epstein had was with Eva Anderson, now known as Eva Anderson Dubin, who is a former model and Miss Sweden. This is widely regarded as his longest and most serious relationship, with some accounts calling her the love of his life at the time. Although most of Epstein's sexual misconduct that you hear about come out of the 90s and afterwards, there are a few women who came out and said that he sexually assaulted him in the 80s, but many of them can't be substantiated. So around the time Epstein breaks up with Eva Anderson, he meets Ghislaine Maxwell. Up until this point, Epstein knew some very wealthy people, but his connections to really famous politicians and entertainment figures in the US and Europe really expanded after his relationship with her. She was a British socialite and daughter of the media mogul Robert Maxwell, who she was really close with. He ends up dying under mysterious circumstances after apparently falling off his yacht in 1991, amid one of the biggest financial scandals in UK history. Her and her family lose most of their fortune, and she was thrown into the spotlight, so she decides to go to the US to get away from everything. Soon after arriving, she ends up meeting Jeffrey Epstein. It doesn't take long until they're inseparable, girlfriend, business partner, and fixer. This was a good trade-off because Epstein could offer her tons of money into the relationship, and she could offer him access to her broad social circle. She was obviously in love with him or his money enough that she was eventually willing to accept the fact that he was not going to be in a monogamous relationship, and she would eventually help him facilitate his sex addiction to minors. Starting as early as 1994, she became his chief recruiter and enabler. Prosecutors proved she lured underage girls, some as young as 14, with promises of modeling work, massages, or school help. She normalized abuse, participated in it, and helped run the operation. Victims describe Maxwell as the one who went and got the girls for Epstein. She flew with him, lived in his properties, and turned his private world into a criminal enterprise. Without her connections in elite circles and hands-on role, the scale of what happened likely never would reach the level that it did. In 2021, a jury convicted her on sex trafficking charges, and she got 20 years in prison. So Epstein had up to 3 massages a day, which were basically a massage and then sex. Generally, he had one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and sometimes in the evening, depending on his schedule, since he traveled a lot between his properties and had tons of other meetings. Either Ghislaine or other women would recruit them for these scheduled massages. They would make around 300 or so and would return if they wanted to make more money, or they could recruit other people, like their friends, acquaintances, or other random girls. So many of his recruiters were victims at one point. These women were often so young they naively assumed it was just for a massage, so they obviously got an unpleasant surprise when he advanced on them at some point. Of course, most women would just leave in such an awkward situation, so having someone like Ghislaine there was a huge help. She has this posh, educated British accent and would even help them with the massage and unclothe herself, normalizing the situation so they were more easily brought into the trap by a woman who seemed trustworthy to them. Epstein and Ghislaine also offered to help women in different ways, like furthering or paying for their education, helping with their careers, paying for their travel, and getting them accepted into various universities. Over the years, he donated millions of dollars to Harvard and MIT and many other research institutes around the world. Part of this might be because he was genuinely interested in some of these research topics, but it was probably more so he could help some of his victims get accepted into some of these prestigious schools more easily. So as I mentioned, Epstein was first arrested in 2006 and basically got a slap on the wrist, probably because he had friends in high places, but no one really knows. He was arrested again in 2019, and this wasn't going to go away easily, especially since the Me Too movement was huge by that time, and even big figures like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein had already been arrested and were going down. He was only there for about a month before he either took his own life or someone took his. I'll do another video about that. So let's go into some of the biggest questions in this case and what his motivations might have been. Was this all about a honeypot operation in general? For instance, did Epstein or Mossad have incriminating information on Trump, so he was forced to attack Iran? Epstein definitely has ties to Israel. He donated to several Israeli organizations and was friends with the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak. Barak visited Epstein's properties multiple times, even after Epstein's 2008 conviction. It doesn't mean he was in Mossad, but Mossad does actively recruit people from the Jewish diaspora through a Hebrew term called sayanim, which is basically Hebrew for helpers or assistants. Mossad actively tries to recruit people to help them leverage their access and professional positions to facilitate their operations discreetly. Examples could include offering business fronts, medical care, document support, safe houses, financial support, etc. Their involvement is typically described as voluntary, limited in scope, and without direct involvement in espionage or violence. So Epstein and many other American Jews help Israel in various ways, which is well known and documented. In 2015, Epstein invested in an Israeli startup called Carbon, a tech company focused on emergency response and surveillance software, co founded with Barak's involvement and ties to Israeli military intelligence alumni. Epstein helped with funding, travel logistics, and investor intros and meetings between high level officials. I wouldn't be surprised if they did or were thinking about doing a honeypot operation, but there are several reasons why it could be doubtful, at least for some of the highest level people he was associated with. If Epstein was doing a honeypot operation and threatened someone like Trump, Clinton, Wexner, or Bill Gates, or any of these high level figures with blackmail, there's a very good chance everyone else in that social circle would find out. And he would be completely alienated from this circle. And this is what he really needed to attract these women, as I'll go into more later. Trump and Epstein haven't even been in the same social circle since the 90s to early 2000s. They both had homes in Palm Beach, Florida, and New York. Trump was on Epstein's plane up to 9 times between these two locations, which isn't weird to take a ride with someone if you both live in the same locations. Trump apparently never went to Epstein Island. Trump and Epstein had a falling out around 2004 over some real estate dealings, which was over 10 years before anyone would even know he was running for office or going to be president in 2016 for the first time. It wasn't until Trump was in his second term that he decided to attack Iran, which was over 20 years at least since they were acquaintances. How would Epstein have the foresight to get dirt on Trump that he might use 20 or 30 years later? Was he thinking, I'll just get some incriminating evidence from some game show host in case he's president in 20 or 30 years? Even if he just did it to blackmail Trump for money or something else, I'm sure Trump would hit back even harder or get revenge in some way. Everyone knew Epstein was with underage girls, as Trump even mentioned before. So it's not like he's coming from a position where he's innocent himself. He's very guilty. I'm sure Trump or anyone else he would blackmail could hire a private detective or an attractive woman to get incriminating evidence, and he would totally be screwed because he's obviously a huge sex addict, so that wouldn't be hard to do. Trump has been accused by about 25 to 28 women of sexual misconduct over the years, and he has denied all of them. Even if there was some incriminating video or pictures of Trump with some girl, I think he would just deny it or say it's AI. We all know he is not a person who will ever admit he's wrong. I would also imagine Trump is probably the kind of guy who would bring a woman to his own place of choosing, not some random guy's house or plane. Now, maybe Epstein's place or his plane might be a safer place for him in some ways, but I don't see any evidence to suggest that Trump was with underage women. Also, if Epstein did arrange to have women be with high-level figures like Trump, Clinton, or Wexner, or Gates, then how come no women have come out and reported this? There's been a huge payout for these victims with this case against Epstein, but almost no credible evidence concerning any high-level figures, besides Prince Andrew and some lower-level figures. One of the women, Virginia Giuffre, was the one who exposed Prince Andrew and implicated other figures like Alan Dershowitz, and he denied any involvement with her, but it's tough to know how credible she is. Maybe she was at the beginning, but she did have a couple unusual things before she unfortunately took her own life in the last year. The month before she died, she was in this big car accident and said she had 4 days to live. But it was reported that the accident was basically just a fender bender, so she was exaggerating for some reason and making that up, basically. And we know she did get millions of dollars from her settlement from Prince Andrew and some money from the Epstein funds. And then later she ends up getting a divorce and lost custody of her kids, at least part-time. So unfortunately, in many cases, we know money can cause more problems than it helps. Trump's involvement in Iran may be influenced by Netanyahu, but it's probably more to do with the fact that he's been surrounded by the Jewish community his whole life. His father, Fred Trump, built his Brooklyn real estate fortune by developing housing for predominantly Jewish post-World War II middle-class families, often acting as their landlord and community developer. He strengthened these business relationships by donating land for a synagogue and supporting Jewish community centers, with his son Donald continuing these ties. Trump was mentored by infamous Jewish figures like Roy Cohn, who was involved in multiple controversies and was accused of unethical and illegal conduct throughout his career. Trump's daughter, Ivanka, married a real estate tycoon, Jared Kushner, which most people know of, who wants to build tons of real estate in Gaza. One of Trump's biggest political donors is Israeli-American Miriam Adelson, a huge Zionist, and there are tons of other Zionists who have contributed to his campaign. Miriam Adelson even said that Trump was the first Jewish president. So Trump's been surrounded by Jews in New York all his life. He didn't need to be blackmailed to do what he's done. I think in Trump's second term, he has been doing as much as he can to take out the various enemies of the U.S., like Venezuela, for instance. Iran has not only been one of the longest enemies of the U.S. and Israel, but a huge security risk. Not so much for the U.S., but definitely for Israel. He's probably trying to set them back long after he leaves office as a favor to the Jewish community, who have mutually helped each other over the years politically and financially. So why did Epstein have all these famous people around him then? Here you can listen to one of Epstein's victims, Juliette Bryant, who explains a lot.
I was studying psychology at the University of Cape Town. And then I started doing modeling on the side because, my family didn't have a lot of money and it was difficult for me getting to university. I didn't have petrol money. So I had to do like some sort of job, obviously, like most people do. So I was doing modeling, and because I got scouted for modeling. I actually got scouted, first of all, when I was 14 by Elite Model Management. My mother would not let me travel. So these bastards, they go for girls when they're even younger. But what happened is when I was 20, I was doing modeling, and basically I went out with a friend of mine to a restaurant, like bar, where they had like free drinks for models, because young girls will always go with these like free drinks and free food or whatever, when you're poor. And then what happened is when I was at that place, a girl approached me and she told me that she worked, well, she didn't say she worked with him. She said that her friend Jeffrey Epstein, who's like the King of America, was here with his best friend Bill Clinton, and he worked with Leslie Wexner, the owner of Victoria's Secret, and they could really help with my modeling career. She also said that Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker were here with him. So of course it sounded like, I almost didn't believe it because I, coming from Africa, I just turned 20 and I'd never met any celebrities in my life. So I was like, obviously very interested to meet them because it sounded like my dreams were all coming true. So I went through and I sat opposite Epstein, and he looked through my modeling book and he said, right, I think you'd be perfect for Victoria's Secret. And then, what happened is after I left there, his office started phoning and arranging me my visa and to get me there. They had me there within 3 weeks, basically.
And was it your impression that Jeffrey Epstein was actually representing Victoria's Secret in terms of somebody who was finding models and recruiting models?
Yes. He made it very clear that he worked with Leslie Wexner and that he was looking for models for Victoria's Secret for Leslie Wexner.
When you finished that meeting, Juliette, was it your impression that, hey, I've got a real shot here to be a model for Victoria's Secret? This is the big breakthrough that I've been trying to get as a young model.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, I really believed it all. I was stupid. But then again, maybe I wasn't stupid. Like a lot of people say, they would have been conned by people like that.
Well, you certainly are far from the only one who's fallen for this. I mean, obviously, you see somebody who's with the president, a former president of the United States, who's with high-level celebrities, and why would you not believe it if a guy says that he's representing Leslie Wexner of Limited Brands and the owner of Victoria's Secret? I mean, it would seem to me that you'd be all in your rights to say this is a legitimate deal.
And he was with Bill Clinton, it just seemed so legitimate. It seemed like the most legitimate opportunity of my whole life. And then what happened is the driver came back and he drove me to Teterboro Airport. And then Epstein was sitting on the front of the plane and he patted the chair like this next to him. And then I went and sat there. And then as soon as the airplane took off, he started touching me in between my legs forcibly.
So everything was for the girls. That's all that matters for a sex addict. I'm sure when Giuffre started doing this in the 80s and 90s, many, if not most of the women walked out totally creeped out, which would be super awkward in general and very disappointing for him. And of course, some of these girls might even go to the authorities, which did happen early on. In the 90s, the Farmer sisters who were assaulted by Epstein had gone to the FBI, but unfortunately, they didn't go after him at that time. No random old dude is going to easily trick 3 different young women a day to have sex with him. So he knew he would need a lot of help. What do women care a lot about? Well, looks could be one thing, but he was much older, so that's not going to help much. So it's going to be his wealth and his social circle and how that might help them in the future. So the mansions and islands helped for optics, but that wasn't enough. So he used women like Ghislaine and others to help groom the women, which helped more. But it wasn't probably until he was surrounded by famous actors and politicians, either on his plane or in photos, that they were completely impressed and overwhelmed. All of this would be insanely impressive for women, especially from poorer backgrounds, whether they're in the States, Eastern Europe, or South Africa, like this one woman, who were most of his victims. I think like the JFK story, it was probably a lone gunman, but people like to use their imagination and end up believing all kinds of stories and conspiracies. With Giuffre Epstein, it's also not very complicated. He was a con artist and a thief who used his charisma to rob rich people to fund his sex addiction. Sure, he did work with Mossad and helped Israel, but almost all wealthy Jews do that. I'm sure he hooked up his friends with underage girls and probably had dirt on some people just in case they turned on him, but nothing to make a president go to war with another country. Are there many other unusual things about this story? Sure, but it's mostly a story as old as time, wealthy men using their position of power to exploit vulnerable young women. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Next time, I'll talk about whether I think Epstein killed himself or not. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.